Bills Mafia, we need to have a very serious conversation today because the trade rumor mill is spinning at a velocity that should have every single Buffalo fan paying extremely close attention right now. ESPN's Dan Graziano went out and named the most significant trade candidates in the entire NFL for the upcoming season. And not only was the Bills' name dropped as a potential suitor for one of the most dominant defensive players in professional football, but there are multiple other names floating around that could genuinely transform this roster from a perennial contender into a legitimate Super Bowl champion. The window with Josh Allen is open right now. The talent on this roster is real right now. The question, the one that keeps Buffalo fans up at night and has for years, is whether Brandon Beane is going to be aggressive enough, smart enough, and fortunate enough to find the missing piece that finally gets this franchise to the promised land. Today, we are breaking down every single trade possibility on the table, evaluating the cost, analyzing the fit, and giving you the honest, unfiltered take on whether the Bills should be making phone calls right now. Let us get into all of it. Start with the biggest name on the entire list, because Graziano did not lead with Max Crosby by accident. When the premier NFL insider at ESPN puts a player first on his trade candidate rankings, that is a signal that he has information, that he has heard things, and that the possibility is more real than a casual off-season exercise in hypotheticals. Max Crosby is the most complete edge rusher in the NFL not named Myles Garrett, and the story of how he almost got traded to Baltimore before the deal collapsed is one of the most dramatic roster transactions of the entire offseason. The Ravens agreed to send the 14th overall pick and a 2027 first-round pick to Las Vegas for Crosby, which would have represented one of the most significant defensive acquisitions in recent memory. And then Baltimore backed out. The reason? Medical concerns about Crosby's surgically repaired left knee, an injury serious enough that it gave the Ravens organization pause after they had already agreed to terms. That knee situation is the critical variable hanging over every conversation about a potential Crosby trade, and it needs to be addressed honestly before anything else. If Crosby comes back healthy and looks like the player who generates double-digit sacks seemingly every time he plays a full season, and the numbers bear this out, because in every season where he has stayed on the field, you are looking at 11, 12, 14 and a half sacks, then you are talking about one of the 5 most valuable defensive players in professional football. A player like that at 29 years old, with $59 million fully guaranteed over the next 2 seasons, is an extraordinary asset for any team with championship aspirations. If that knee is genuinely compromised, if the injury that scared Baltimore away is indicative of a player whose elite production is behind him rather than ahead of him, then the entire calculation changes, and the Bills would be wise to keep their draft capital close. The interesting dynamic here is that Graziano specifically mentioned Buffalo as the second team that came to mind when he thought about contenders who might need an impact pass rusher and be willing to do business. The Bills were already in the Crosby sweepstakes when the Ravens deal was being assembled. Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer confirmed Buffalo had their toe in the water at the peak of those trade talks. The issue was simple and painful. The Ravens had the 14th overall pick, which gave them dramatically more trade currency than Buffalo's 26th selection. The Jimmy Johnson draft value chart does not lie, and that gap between 14 and 26 represents enough value that the Bills simply could not compete dollar for dollar with what Baltimore was offering. But circumstances change. If Crosby returns to the field in August or September, gets some game action, demonstrates that the knee is functional and his production is intact, the trade market around him could look very different from the situation that existed when Baltimore had leverage as the only team willing to pay top-tier first-round pick prices. A Crosby who has proven his health at a reduced trade value, a situation that could emerge if the Raiders are struggling early in the season. if they are sitting at 1-5 with no realistic playoff path, and if they are genuinely open to pivoting off a $30 million defensive end for a team trying to rebuild, is a completely different transaction than the Crosby who nearly went to Baltimore for 2 firsts. The Bills could absolutely be positioned to take advantage of that scenario, and the cost likely 2 first-round picks or something close to it, perhaps a first and a second with additional depth pieces, would be painful but potentially worth it for a franchise that has been knocking on the Super Bowl door for years. Think about what Max Crosby does to a Bills defense that already has Greg Rousseau, Bradley Chubb, and TJ Parker on the edge. You are talking about one of the most terrifying pass rush rotations in the entire AFC, anchored by a player who does not just rush the passer, but who is equally dominant against the run, who plays with relentless effort for 17 games, and who makes every offensive line he faces work harder than they want to work. Pair that kind of defensive transformation with Josh Allen operating at an MVP level on the other side of the ball, and you have the blueprint for a Super Bowl roster. The question is always about the cost, and the honest answer is that if Crosby is healthy, no cost is too high for a franchise with a window this clearly defined. Now let us talk about the more affordable options on the trade market, because not every Bills improvement needs to come with a blockbuster price tag, and there are several genuinely interesting names that could be acquired at a cost the front office can absorb without gutting the future. Josh Sweat of the Arizona Cardinals is perhaps the most intriguing of the bunch, and the fit makes tremendous sense when you think about it carefully. Sweat recorded 12 sacks in 2025 and is a legitimate NFL pass rusher who brings something the Bills' current edge group does not have in abundant speed, bend, and a different physical profile than the power rushers who make up the rest of the rotation. Rousseau, Parker, and Chubb are all athletic in their own ways, but they lean toward the power rushing archetype. Sweat's quick twitch off the line and his ability to win with pure speed around the edge would give defensive coordinator a completely different look to deploy in obvious passing situations, and that variety is what makes a pass rush truly dangerous rather than merely good. Sweat has not shown up to Cardinals OTAs, which is the kind of signal that suggests a player and an organization may be drifting apart in a way that makes a trade more realistic rather than less. Arizona is a team that is very clearly in a different phase of their organizational cycle than Buffalo is, and a 3rd or 4th round pick to acquire a 12-sack edge rusher who is not on their timeline is exactly the kind of deal that makes sense for both sides. The Bills would be adding a proven pass rusher at a fraction of the cost of a Max Crosby trade, and Arizona would be getting draft capital for a player whose best seasons may come with a team that can use him in the right role. Kayvon Thibodeau of the New York Giants has been in the trade rumor ecosystem for long enough that his name appearing again is not surprising, but the circumstances around him have shifted in ways that affect the evaluation. When Thibodeau broke out in 2023 while the Giants were struggling, he looked like the kind of player you build a defense around. Since then, the Giants have added Brian Burns, Abdul Carter, and Arvell Reese, creating an edge rush depth chart so crowded that Thibodeau has been squeezed down the pecking order through no fault of his own. He remains a relatively productive player with legitimate athletic gifts, but the context in which he has been playing reduced snaps, reduced opportunity, reduced role makes it genuinely difficult to evaluate exactly what you are acquiring. The smart play here is patience. Wait until the deadline, see how his production looks with whatever opportunities he gets early in the season, and if the Giants are clearly looking to move him and his numbers justify the investment, spend a 3rd or 4th round pick to add him to the rotation. The risk is manageable. The upside is real. Keyshawn Boot of the New England Patriots represents a different kind of need for the Bills, a receiver upgrade that could help Josh Allen have even more weapons to work with in the passing game. Boute put up 551 yards last year with 6 touchdowns and averaged 17 yards per catch, numbers that look even more impressive when you consider he was doing it as the third option in the Patriots' offense. The question of whether the Bills and Patriots would actually do business together is a legitimate one. Divisional rivals trading impact players to each other is genuinely rare in professional football, and Boston and Buffalo have enough competitive friction that this kind of transaction would require both organizations to set aside the natural reluctance to help a conference rival. The price point makes it worth thinking about. A fourth-round pick is a number that does not scare you, and if Boot can step into a legitimate WR2 role in Buffalo's offense rather than functioning as a WR3 in New England, the production upside could be significant. A third-round pick is probably too much given the uncertainty and the divisional dynamic, but a fourth? That is worth a phone call. And then there is the Brandon Ayuk situation, which is something that needs to be addressed carefully and honestly because the talent and the baggage come in equal measure. 3 seasons ago, Ayuk put up 1,342 yards and 7 touchdowns in 16 games. That production was elite. The player who generated those numbers is genuinely one of the more talented wide receivers of his generation. And the talent does not simply evaporate because the circumstances around it became chaotic. The Bills have a history of taking on reclamation projects, of bringing in players who had complicated situations elsewhere and getting production out of them that other teams could not unlock. That organizational identity is part of what makes this scenario at least worth considering. But the key word there is considering, not pursuing aggressively. Ayuk has an arrest warrant, has not played since 2024 after refusing to participate in rehab for serious knee surgery, has voided nearly $27 million in guaranteed money, and has demonstrated behavioral patterns that suggest whatever is happening in his personal life goes beyond simple professional frustration. The smart play is exactly what was suggested. Do not trade anything meaningful for him. Do not give up a single pick of real value. But if the 49ers eventually release him outright and he is available for nothing, a low-risk look to see if the talent can be unlocked one more time is defensible for a team that has the coaching infrastructure and the winning environment to potentially get through to him. The overarching question for Bills Mafia right now is whether Brandon Beane is going to be aggressive enough to seize this moment. The AFC is not getting easier. The Chiefs are always there. The Ravens are loaded. The Bengals are building back. And Josh Allen's window, while still very much open, is not infinite. Every year that passes without a Super Bowl is a year of prime Allen production that cannot be recovered. The talent on this roster is already championship caliber in many respects. The pieces around Allen are genuinely good. But good enough and great are separated by exactly the kinds of moves that are being discussed right now: a Crosby acquisition, a Sweat addition, a receiver upgrade, and the decision-making over the next several months could define the next 2 or 3 years of Bills football. If Max Crosby gets on a field in August and looks like Max Crosby, Brandon Beane better be making that phone call immediately. If Josh Sweat becomes available at a third-round pick price, the answer is yes without hesitation. The window is open. The talent is here. The time to be aggressive is now. Bills Mafia, you already know what to do. Smash that like button right now. Drop your take in the comments, T for trade or P for pass on Max Crosby, and which player on this list makes the most sense for Buffalo. And if you are not already subscribed to the channel, fix that right now. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and never miss a single Bills update all off-season long. We are less than 200 subscribers away from the next milestone, and we want you there with us. Let us go Buffalo.